So I'm Manuela. I'm from Brazil, actually. I live in Portugal now, but I'm from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro. I had my bachelor degree in geology, and I'm also a master science student in petroleum engineering. And today we're going to talk about the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Because today we have a lot of things to do in energy transition, and actually we are from the oil and gas industry. You probably were from petroleum engineering, right? Courses and chemical engineering. So uh, I'm talking about me a little bit. Um, as I said, I'm from Rio, and I always loved geology. Like, it's my passion of life. I love rocks. I love to understand why these things happen in our nature, in our world. And in fact, when I entered in the university, I liked a lot the sedimentary geology. That is the most part of the oil and gas industry that we used to study. And I always think like, how can I give it back to society and for the environment, the knowledge that I acquired during the university. And I always, people, I don't know if you heard this sometime, that people think us like monsters because we are dealing with oil and gas and we are going to destroy the world and CO2 emissions. And I always thought like, how can I tell people that it's not like that, that we need the energy, but we can do this sustainable. And how can we convert all this greenhouse effect and global warming? How can we do to convert that in a good thing, in a good way to don't have a lot of these emissions? And I thought, CO2 capture and storage. And I try to integrate the geology that we study, the rocks, we understand what is going on subsurface, and how can we inject CO2 inside the rocks to mitigate the CO2 emissions and to reach net zero in 2050, and what else. So to introduce, the CO2 emissions started to increase in the Industrial Revolution, obviously, and after that, people started to talk about the renewables and the energy transition. How can we do to mitigate these emissions? How can we mitigate these emissions? And we are talking about today, like with wind power, solar power, a lot of bioenergy. So we're talking about the energy transition and renewables. We are going to start the bioenergy, the wind power, solar power, and the industry had to change their paradigms to mitigate these emissions because of the global warming and the greenhouse effect. So what fossil fuels could do to mitigate these emissions, because the renewables are get into in the market, but the fossil fuels is still very needy. We cannot, until now, we cannot compare the capacity of fossil fuels and the capacity of energy that the renewables. First, renewables are very expensive. I'm not saying that fossil fuels is not, but renewables are very expensive. Is not yet accessible energy. We need some climate climatic issues to dealing with the renewables, and how can fossil fuels mitigate these emissions during with the global warming. And that's why CCUS gets into the market. So the CO2 carbon capture, the carbon capture usage and storage, it's a new concept to mitigate these emissions. So before we talk about the carbon capture, in fact, I'm just talking about the carbon cycle. You probably know this better than me if you do chemical engineering or anything else. The carbon cycle is a natural cycle, right? And we have some kinds of scientists that think like, yes, global warming do exist, but the social media and the notice talk a lot like the world is going to end, and they think this is very too much, you know. And that some kinds of scientists that agree that global warming exists, and the motive is because of the human activities. I'm on this part of scientists that believes that the human activities are increasing our CO2 emissions, and that's why we are getting into a global warming conditions. But of course, also the Earth is getting to a global natural warming during the geological time. So let's talk about the CCUS process. The first of the thing, we have the capture of the CO2. So imagine you have a complex of industries of cement, I don't know, and they emit a lot of CO2, and they say, okay, we're going to capture the CO2, we're going to transport that and do two kinds of destinies. We could do the utilization. That means you can use, like in chemical industries, to correct pH. You can use in industries that use greenhouses. You can use the CO2 to measure some stuffs in the industry, like minerals, biological, chemicals. What else? And you can have another destiny, that is the storage. So when you what that's mean that you storage the CO2, we have some reservoirs, on subsurface, and we are going to inject the CO2 to be there like forever, you know. Or we can do that to produce more oil. Like if we have a field that is already in production, but the oil is ending before, okay? The oil is ending, we can do the injection of CO2 to produce more oil, like with the oils in the pores. When you inject, they do a pressure to get the oil back to the surface. So let's talk about this in more detail in the next slide. But now I'm just want to talk that CCUS process have these 3 steps. The first, the capture, can be in the industries or directly by air, as we have a project in Iceland that's called Orca. We have a plan a development to capture the CO2 directly by the air, or we can do the capture in the industries, in the big sources emissions. Then we will transport the CO2, can do by pipelines, by ships, by trains, by trucks. We have to find the best solution to transport the CO2 from the source to the storage or the industry which will utilize the CO2. And then we have the two destinies. But now we're going to focus on storage because this is why we are here. So storage, we have different kinds of storage. You probably know what is a reservoir. You probably study this on the oil reservoir, the reservoir engineering. I don't know if you have this subject yet, but we have some geological formations that we have oil. So we have some reservoirs that could have coal beds, or could have oil and gas, or just have water, just have pores. I don't know. And now we are going to inject the CO2 in these reservoirs to be there forever. So we capture the CO2 in the facility or power plants, do the transportation by ships, by pipelines, whatever. And now we're going to inject the CO2 into our geological formations. So if we have some saline aquifer, we can inject there. We can inject in salt caverns. We can inject for enhanced oil recovery, that, as I said, to produce more oil. When the reservoir is depleted, and this is why are we going to study in more details about the geological characterizations, do the seismic interpretation, because we need to have traps. We have to study the conditions of the reservoir, because imagine you are injecting CO2 in lots of pressure. You have to understand why is the comportment of the reservoir. Like, if you inject, will be fractures. Will the CO2 can escape? You have to understand the conditions, the reservoir, to know if you can inject or not, right? And the most favorable reservoirs are sedimentary formations, because we have a lot of pores. We have permeability, not in every formation, but we have to study them to understand their conditions. And also could be in basalt formations, because we could have fractures and we have space to inject the CO2. So let's think about the CO2 world context. We have a lot of emissions. This table we were provided by International Energy Agency, and we can see that industry and power energy, in general, the transport emits a lot of our CO2. So we have to mitigate that something if we wanted to achieve net zero and reduce the CO2 emissions, right? So the CCUS in the world, we have a lot of commercial CCS and pilot projects. In fact, the most of them use for enhanced oil recovery, as I said, to produce more oil when it's finishing. And the most famous, no, before that, we have that commercial CCS, that are the commercial that the CCS is happening, and get back money, as I said, like, when you inject the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, we are getting we are reduce the taxes that you have to pay because of the emissions, because you're reduction the emissions injecting, and also you are doing enhanced oil recovery, so you have more production of oil and you have more money back, right? And here we have the potential storage resources in the world. And look who is here. Azerbaijan is here, and it's more than 129 gigatons CO2 storage resources. Brazil is also a good one. Portugal, for now, is not, but I'm doing my master thesis on that, so maybe we can find something. And the most famous, you probably heard about Sleipner field. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's the most famous CCS in the world. Is in the offshore of Norway. And we have the CO2 injection in Utsira formation, and we can see in this image in the seismic that we have the increase of CO2, and these layers are indications of the CO2 injection. So in 1096 we don't have CO2. Then we started to put CO2 subsurface, and then in 2001, and we are going to predict. We can predict and we can follow the CO2 injections in the subsurface. That if you want to reach net zero in 2050, we have to, this next 3 years we have to do a lot. So just let's see the video. Just let's see. Okay, now I can go. I just wanted to do some conclusions that so according to YEA and YPCC, the CCS also has to be implemented rapidly if countries want to achieve the emission reduction values established in Paris Agreement. So the reach net zero, to find some mitigates of the CO2 emissions, and CCUS is in an early stage of commercialization. Politics and innovation support are critical factors also. For sectors like cement, steels, and chemicals, CCUS constitutes the best and most efficient alternative to reduce CO2 emissions, and sharing CO2 transportation and storage facilities can help to considerably reduce costs. Because why is that is important? We know that renewables are very expensive. We know that CCS is very expensive also. But when we have a lot of industries, imagine we have, I don't know, 10 industries of cement, 5 cements of plastics, 5 industries of steels and chemicals. I don't know. So we have a group of industries, and they say like, well, I emit, I don't know, a number of CO2. You emit another number of CO2, and you emit a lot of other number of CO2. Let's put this together. Let's capture this together, transport this CO2 and storage this CO2, and share our costs. And then you can storage the CO2, reduce costs of taxes, because we have to pay taxes for an amount of CO2 emission. And this is why we don't know yet, and we are studying a lot of this, because why companies will spend a lot of money to storage the CO2? Because they can reduce the taxes that they pay for the state to these emissions. So if they storage with a group of industries, they can share this price, this costs of the storage, and mitigate their costs of the taxes. So it will be nice if industries do some groups of different kinds of industries to share the costs of the CO2 storage, right? So now I will open for questions, but now I want to talk with you and be this more interactive, to not be just a boring webinar. What can we do to mitigate that? And what can we do in our courses to follow the energy transition? I will start, and then if someone can want to say, it is open, okay? Now I'm doing my master thesis in the CCUS. I'm geologist and also doing my master in petroleum engineering. So what am I doing is to study an area here in Portugal, to understand the reservoir conditions and the geological formations, to be possible storage potential. So I'm doing seismic interpretation, historic analysis about the data, and also doing the seismic interpretation. I will understand where is the reservoirs, where is the traps, if we have oil here in Portugal. I don't know if we can do some enhanced oil recovery, if could be with the injection with CO2, if you can produce oil. I don't know that, but I'm trying to understand about the reservoir conditions here in Portugal, understand the petroleum systems, um, to integrate some industries. We have a lot of cement industries here, and if they want, they can capture their CO2 and inject in some reservoirs. So this is why am I doing today, to follow the energy transitions. So I will open the floor if someone wanna say. If you can start, Medina, maybe you can say something that people feel more free to say.
Yeah, actually, I would like to say on behalf of our team, SPBHU Student Chapter, we can hold more sessions like this to raise awareness among the students. I believe that especially sessions about renewable energy can inspire someone to, if not, have whole research about this, or maybe go to masters, specifically in carbon capture and storage, but maybe they can be interested to do some self-research themselves, and then maybe pursue their master's degrees, or maybe their career in the renewable energy field. So I guess like this.
And what course are you doing? You're doing petroleum engineering?
No, chemical process engineering.
Ah, chemical. Okay. Like chemicals can also be integrated in the part of the usage also, because when they use the CO2, when they use CO2 for utilization, most of them are the chemical industries also. And chemical engineering is very important to understand the comportment of the CO2, what is going to be with a lot of pressure, the element in fact, right? So anyone else want to talk about, want to ask something? Maybe I will stop sharing my screen just to see some faces.
Yeah, actually we have 2 questions in the chat box.
Okay, I didn't see that.
So if you want, I can read them for you. So does injected or stored CO2 have some bad effects on soil?
Yeah, this when you inject something, also with when you have oil exploration, right? We have to understand if we don't have leakage, like if the CO2 won't spread into our soil, like if we have a aquifer, imagine that we are going to inject into aquifer that is going to spread to some river. This not makes so sense. So before we inject, we have to understand if the CO2 won't spread into the surface. Have nice traps, have some nice traps to be closer to storage, in fact, the CO2, you know. So you have to before we inject, we have to understand if the CO2 won't leak and spread into the soil.
I believe it's clear. And in terms of operational challenges, how can leakage of CO2 in depleted reservoir be mitigated? This is another question.
Okay. How can leakage to be mitigated? Actually, I said before that we have to understand about these traps, like if we're going to do oil recovery, enhanced oil recovery with oil or gas, when you are going to inject the CO2 and want to produce more oil, we have to understand the conditions of the reservoir. So if the pressure will do some fractures, if we have traps enough to close this reservoir. So we have to understand a lot of that, and this is probably have a group of scientists or group of people in different areas with reservoir engineering, geologists, geophysics, petroleum engineering. We have to understand all the complex conditions of the depleted reservoirs. You know, I don't know if I answered your question. Hope so. Say any name of topic related for topic. What do you mean for topic? You can also unmute your microphones and speak with me also.
Yeah, that would be great, actually. I believe maybe Arzo wants to ask that if we would like to do research on topic of carbon, on topic of CCS,
Yeah.
like what specifically, maybe what branch or what challenge maybe she can do as a research, because CCS is a bit general for research paper, but maybe some specifically you can advocate for her.
Okay. If I understand your question, before we have to understand which area would you like to work on. So, like in myself, I'm doing my master thesis, especially with seismic interpretation, because CCS it's very general, yeah, of course. And what do I want to finish in my thesis? Do I want to know if there are reservoirs? Do I want to know if the volumes of the reservoirs, the traps? We have to before that we have to specificate an area that we want to talk about and write the scientific paper. Like in my case, I'm doing the seismic interpretation of an area here in Portugal that we have potential to storage, but I have to understand if the traps and if the reservoirs are doing a good job integrating themselves. So if you want, I don't know if that was you were asking, but if you want something on to search, like on Salvier or Google Academic, I don't know. You probably write like the keywords could be CCS, but you could write the subject that you want. So if you want to talk about the reservoir conditions, if you want to talk about some geostatistics or some data analysis, something on reservoir engineering itself, you could do some keywords, and if you need some help, you can send me a message. I left here my email and my LinkedIn if you want to send a message. Okay. You're welcome. I don't know if I answer your question, but hope so. Someone did raise.
Yeah, actually, someone raised his hand.
It's just to make a comment regarding the CCS technology and everything. It was an excellent presentation by you, Manuela. You already know. Regarding the subject itself of researching, there is a lot of companies and I can talk by experience because I work in one right now, that they are leading multiple projects regarding the CCS and how they can enhance some of the oil recovery with that. So if there is anyone interested in maybe following this path or this kind of research within the reservoirs, try to search because there is a lot of interest in this area. Okay, it's just a comment.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's an area that is increased a lot because, like as I said in this here, we have a lot of projects that are being pilots and commercial CCS in world, like here in Abu Dhabi, in Brazil, in United States. Also,
I can give an example. Here in France, I'm right now in France. We the company I'm working with, you already know, but the other guys doesn't know. It is Total Energies, and they are leading multiple projects of CCS inside house and outside house. Okay, just to say. And one perspective you talked about is also the reducing of the taxes, but also they are trying to use deeply the reservoirs as a way to storage and to use those end products to give to other industries, chemical industries, to produce other end products, for example.
yeah, yeah, I think that this is very important to understand that renewables are expensive, but also CCS are expensive. But the industries, the companies want to inject CCS also to enhance oil recovery, but also to mitigate the taxes that they paid before the emissions of CO2. So it's increasing in the world, this kind of activities, and I think it's important if you want to follow this path, to understand that we have a lot to do in few years. Like some countries want to, like Norway, I think they want to achieve net zero in 2030 maybe, and I think Australia wants to reach 2045, and the world wants to mitigate before reaching net zero before 2050, and we have a lot to do. So we need to have students to do research on this kind of subject, you know. And I just want to ask you, let me stop here, if there is someone here that is want to follow this path of CCS, of carbon capture, even if you were chemical engineering or petroleum engineering or something else. If someone wants to talk about something, the floor is open.
There is also a question in the chat box. So how you define the potential zone for CCS in terms of seismic, like what values identify this zone from stochastic and deterministic seismic inversion approach? I believe that you can read it also by yourself because there are many terms that I don't know as a chemical engineer, unfortunately.
Yeah, like when you define the potential zone, like you have to, when you're going to find a prospect like in oil and gas, you have to put together a lot of informations, like the traps, the permeability, the some petrophysics characteristics of the reservoirs, do some velocity models, understand what is going on subsurface, right? And the CCS is the same. Like when you are going to understand the potential of a reservoir, you also have to understand about these characteristics also. So you have to understand the permeability, you have to understand the porosity, the density, all petrophysics characteristics of these rocks, and also geophysics, and also reservoir characteristics like the engineering itself, like the pressure, the temperature, you need to understand. And when you do the seismic, you need to see which reservoirs could be potentials, like with the traps, aggregate the reservoir, the traps, if it will be enhance oil recovery, how do you inject, if you need to fracture the zone. You have to do like the same as you are trying to find a prospect in the oil and gas itself. And what values identify these from the material approach? In fact, I didn't know how to answer this last question, but when you need to understand that all the things that we do to prospect, to find, to do exploration in oil and gas, we need to do in carbon injection, the carbon storage, because we need to do the same conditions. Like we have to need the traps, we have the permeability and the porosity itself. We need to understand the conditions of the reservoir, and we can do this with seismic inversion, with seismic interpretation. We can understand the geostatistics of the area, using a lot of programs. You can use maybe Petrel. I don't know which programs do you use in your universities, but it's important to know and to understand the really conditions. And you can't think that is the same ways that you were going to study in the oil and gas activities itself, because you are dealing with higher pressures, you are dealing with drilling, with a lot of complex conditions. It is important to do this, the things right,
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I guess that there is no questions anymore in the chat box, and I don't see any raised hands as well. So I just would like thank you so much, dear Manuela, for allocating your time, for being with us today, for sharing your knowledge. Although my major is a bit far, I would say, than petroleums from CCS, I myself get really inspired. And I also would like to thank our participants for showing their interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Medina. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I try to put this not so boring, and I hope to inspire you to follow this path. And thank you again for SPA Student Capture also. Thank you so much for everybody who is being here in a Saturday. Okay, thank you so much. Bye bye. Have a nice day.